Let us talk about Mauryan economy today. The Mauryan period witnessed many important developments in the economic field. It was basically rooted in agriculture, though mining and metallurgy witnessed progress. A great deal of the economic life of the country was controlled by the state. The state was the largest employer of labor and controlled and organized agriculture, industry, and trade of the country. So, in this video, we will talk about these things. Firstly, we will talk about the main features of agrarian economy, agrarian expansion, and land revenue during this period. Secondly, how trade was organized and how it expanded, opening up new areas of activity. Then we will talk about the nature of urban economy and also how towns and cities grew in the period. Also about the improvements in technology that occurred during this period, and finally we will try to analyze how the above developments led to significant socio-economic changes. So let us begin talking about agriculture and land revenue first. In this section we will discuss the general features of agrarian economy and land revenue organization. Now, general features of agrarian economy. First of all, according to the Arthashastra, the settlement of permanent villages was a method for the expansion of agrarian economy. These settlements ensured a sound and stable resource base for the state to extract taxes, and land tax formed the bulk of it. This process of settlement was particularly known as Janpad Nivesh. Secondly, the cultivator began to assume an increasingly important role with the growth of agriculture. In fact, Megasthenes, in his account of the Indian society and its division into 7 classes, mentions the farmers as the second class next only to philosophers. Farmers were numerically a large class devoted to land, and classical sources specifically mention that the cultivators were without arms. Megasthenes also maintains that the peasants were left untouched during war. Another feature of the agrarian economy of this period was Sita or crown lands. Some lands were Sita or crown lands. In these areas, the king's and the state's right of possession, cultivation, mortgage, and sale were naturally superior. In Arthashastra, a Sita Dhyaksha or superintendent of agriculture is mentioned who probably supervised the cultivation works here. These areas were in all probability fertile and suited to high productivity, and these were also areas where slaves were deployed working under direct state supervision. We also find that agriculture in other areas of the Mauryan state known as Janpad territories was in all probability carried on privately. In the Jatak stories, there are frequent references to Gahapatis and Gram Bhojakals. These groups are said to have employed hired laborers on land, indicating their capacity to do so as a land-owning gentry. In contrast, the laborers are described to be in a pitiable condition, and sometimes slaves are also mentioned. Now, the most important reason for the success of agriculture in state-owned lands was the facility of irrigation provided by the state. There were rules for the regulation of water supply for the benefit of agriculturists. There is also a mention of an irrigation cess amounting to a fifth, a fourth, or a third of the produce in the Arthashastra. The state regulated irrigation facilities in areas where rainfall was scarce. In fact, Pushyagupta, one of the governors of Chandragupta Maurya, is said to have built a dam for creating a reservoir of water near Girnar in Saurashtra, which was known as the Sudarshan Tadak or the water tank. Now, after we have seen the general features of agrarian economy, let us see how land revenue organization was carried on in the Mauryan period. So, the essential resources needed for the Mauryan state could be got from land revenue. Therefore, land revenue collection had to be efficiently organized so as to expropriate the maximum possible surplus from the people. The Mauryan rule constitutes a landmark in the history of the improvement of the system of taxation in ancient India. So, the Mauryas attached great importance to the assessment of land revenue, and the highest officer in charge of this was the Samharta. The Sannidhata was the chief custodian of the state treasury, and since revenue was also collected in kind, providing storage facilities was also the duty of the Sannidhata. Now, land tax or bhag was the main item of revenue. According to the texts, it was levied at the rate of one-sixth of the produce, but it is possible that in the Mauryan period it was quite high and levied at the rate of one-fourth of the produce. The Lumbini Edict of Ashoka says that he exempted the village from the payment of Bali and reduced the payment of Bhag by one-eighth because it was the birthplace. Lumbini was the birthplace of Buddha. Then there were other customary dues that the peasants had to pay. For example, we have the Pindkar or the Pindkar. The peasants paid this tax, which was assessed on groups of villages, and this was customary in nature. Then we have Hiranya. Hiranya's exact nature is not known, but it was probably a tax paid in cash because Hiranya literally means gold. Then we have Bali, which was a tax levied from the Vedic times and continued under the Mauryas as well. And there was Pranay. This is a tax first mentioned by Panini, but it was elaborated upon for the first time in the Arthashastra, and it amounted to one-third or one-fourth of the produce according to the nature of the soil. Now, we find that as land revenue was the backbone of the Mauryan economy, the Arthashastra very carefully designs the revenue system of the state. The Mauryan state must have ensured a substantial land revenue collection, without which the government machinery and the army would have been difficult to maintain. Now, the second aspect of Mauryan economy, which is about trade and towns. The non-agrarian economy of the Mauryan Empire revolved around two interrelated developments. First was the expansion of trade and commerce, and the second one was the establishment of new towns and markets. The development of the agrarian economy had given a solid economic basis to the Mauryan Empire. However, it was the expansion of commercial economy that enabled it to extend its resource base to other parts of the country. Let us see how trade was organized. Trade did not suddenly develop during this period. It was part of the larger process of economic change which had begun much before the Mauryan times, and the security provided by Mauryan rule enabled internal trade to blossom. So first we will talk about some important trade routes. The major trade routes in northern India were along the river Ganges and the Himalayan foothills. Major centers like Rajgriha in Magad and Kasambi were connected in this way. The northern route going to such sites as Shravasti and Kapilvastu was connected through the city of Vaishali. From Kapilvastu, this route linked up Kalsi, Hazara and eventually led to Peshawar. Megasthenes also talks of a land route connecting the northwest with Patliputra. Now, in the south, it was connected to central India, and in the southeast to Kalinga. From Kosambi, moving westwards, another route led to Ujjain. The overland route to countries of the west went via Takshila. Next important aspect about the economy or about trade and towns is the guilds. Trade was intrinsically linked to the methods of production and its organization, and primarily in North India, craft production was organized on guild or shreni lines. Under the Mauryas, When the number of artisan groups had increased, we find guilds organized in different towns, inhabiting particular sections of them. These guilds generally worked and lived together in a closely knit relationship. These guilds became very powerful during this period, as is evident from a number of inscriptions. And Megasthenes mentions the artisans as one of the seven castes, and the well-known guilds of the period were those of metallurgists of various kinds, carpenters, potters, leather workers, painters, textile workers, etc. Like the artisans, the merchants were also organized along guild lines. So this was about the guilds or the shrenis. Now, what was the state policy on trade? The state administration under the Mauryas also took up the organization of trade. This administrative control on production and distribution made it more efficient. This did not mean, however, that it directly interfered with and changed the guild organization. On the other hand, it increased its control on the distribution of their goods and itself became a producer. At another level, it gradually converted some crafts into some sort of small scale industries. These steps to organize trade and commodity production were part and parcel of the state policy, and this policy was aimed at augmenting its efficiency in economic spheres of activity and its revenues. Let us talk about the officials who were involved in trade. Megasthenes mentions a superintendent of commerce whose duty was to fix prices of goods, and this official is known as the Panyadhyaksh. Then we have the Samsthadhyaksh. The office of the Samsthadhyaksh looked after the markets, and he also checked the wrong practices of the traders. Then we have the Potavadhyaksh or superintendent of weights and measures, who exerted a strict control on maintaining standard weights and measures. Navadhyaksh was another official who was in charge of state boats that facilitated transport, and he helped in regulating river transport and collecting ferry charges. Sulkadhyaksh was another important official. He was a superintendent of tools who collected taxes and customs dues from traders. Now, when we have talked about trade and the commercial economy, we will now talk about how urban economy grew and what were the main aspects of urban economy. Now, the process of urbanism, which had begun in the pre-Mauryan period, witnessed further growth in the Mauryan period. So, first we will talk about the towns. The material remains of the Mauryan phase show that the urban centers had definitely increased during this period. According to the Arthashastra, through a process of Durga Nivesh or Durga Vidhan, the state founded walled towns, and these towns were said to be peopled by priests, nobles, soldiers, merchants, artisans, etc. Arthashastra viewed towns or durg as an important source of revenue, and the taxes received from towns paid rich dividends to the state, and therefore development and administration of towns was given much importance by the Mauryas. Megasthenes gives a detailed description of the Mauryan capital Patliputra, which helps us in understanding how, in general, how towns were administered. He says that Patliputra was administered by 30 officials who were divided into 6 committees of 5 members each. Of these 6 committees, 4 were related to economic activity. They dealt with industrial arts, trade and commerce, supervision of public sale of manufactured goods, and the collection of tax on articles sold. The other 2 committees were concerned with the welfare of foreigners and the registration of births and deaths. However, in the absence of enough information, it is not possible to describe the exact nature of the administration of small cities, port towns, and pilgrimage centers. But the development of the Mauryan economy in general made it possible for towns of various kinds to flourish. Then we talk about currency. Another significant aspect of urban economy is that it created the situation for the development of transactions in cash and the circulation of coin money. Now, the use of currency became fairly common during the Mauryan period because of the development of commerce. The importance of cash in the economy can be gauged from the fact that it was probably used to pay salaries of the officials in cash. So the Arthashastra lists the range of salaries expected to be paid, and this varied from 48,000 panas to 60 panas. Now, for such a powerful cash economy to function, the minting of coins and the supply of metals like silver and copper required to do so were of prime importance. And these were harnessed by the Mauryas, which is evident for the innumerable punch marked, mostly silver coins, which are assignable to this period, mostly coming from Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, which constituted the core area of the empire. Let us look at the officials who organize this urban economy. Now, this kind of urban economy definitely envisaged substantial state control. So, the state also had to maintain a monopoly in certain important spheres of activity. So, we have the mention of Akaradhyaksh, who was probably a superintendent of mines, and we also find the mention of a superintendent of iron, who was known as Lohadhyaksh. This was about urban economy, trade and towns. The third important aspect of the modern economy was crafts and industry. The state had a monopoly in many industries which required a lot of money. So, mining industry was nationalized in view of its great importance as a primary source of its wealth. And we have officers like Savarnika, who was officer in charge of gold and silver. Then we have Khanyadhyaksh, who looked after government business in pearls, conch shells, and precious stones. The manufacture of salt was a state monopoly, and the state also had its cotton, oil, sugar, and dairy industries. The government had a monopoly in armament industry and in the building of boats and ships. The right of coining also belonged to the state. We find the mention of Lakshanadhyaksh, who was the master of the mint. Spinning and weaving were undertaken in the state spinning house, and the raw materials were obtained from the state owned agricultural lands, forests, and mines. So, if we are to conclude about the Mauryan economy, we will have to say that the most distinguishing feature of Mauryan economy was emphasis on state control in agriculture, trade, and industry. And for acquiring these resources, the state had to levy a variety of taxes. So, this is where we come to an end of the Mauryan economy. But it would be helpful if for 2 minutes we just look into how the Mauryan society was organized, or the social organization of the Mauryas. Now, in considering the social organization of the Mauryan period, a useful approach is that of examining the reports made by contemporary visitors and the foreign sources. So, first we talk about the caste system. Greek and Latin sources refer to the caste system, and the majority of these references may be traced largely to the account of Megasthenes. Now, Megasthenes states that the Mauryan society was divided into 7 classes. We will see what these 7 classes were. The first caste mentioned by Megasthenes is that of philosophers, which is generally believed to represent the Brahmanas. And among the privileges of the philosophers, Megasthenes mentions the exemption from taxation. According to Megasthenes, the second class among the 7 Indian castes was that of the farmer. This class was numerically large and was devoted to the land. The cultivators, the land belonged to the king, and it was cultivated by the cultivators. and the farmers, they paid 1/4 of the produce on tax. And in addition to the tax, they also paid a land tribute to the king. Third important class was that of the soldier, and as Megasthenes mentions soldiers as one of the 7 divisions, that emphasizes the importance of the army, and uh, perhaps the Mauryan standing army was larger than that of the Nandas. Herdsmen, they form the fourth category. They have been listed as tribes, presumably pastoralists, still adhering to clan identities. The next caste was that the caste of the artisan, which depended on his particular craft. And the more wealthy were probably of the upper castes, whereas those working for them we again have been Shudras. Now, the sixth and the seventh castes were the magistrates and the councillors. They were obviously part of the administrative system and would tend to be either Brahmanas or Kshatriyas, although there are certain exceptions also. Let us talk about the position of women. Women occupied a high position and freedom in the Mauryan society. The ruling class was known to have been polygamous. For example, we know that Ashoka has had as many as 4 queens. Sati was rarely practiced and would appear to have been limited to the women of higher classes. Another important aspect is about slavery. Now, Megasthenes has stated in his account that there were no slaves in India. But this remark has led to much debate, since the existence of slaves is mentioned in Indian sources, and in fact, most of the labor power was supplied by slaves and hired laborers. So, why did Megasthenes think that there were no slaves? The reason is that it is possible that Megasthenes, having the Greek conception of slavery in mind, did not recognize the Indian system, which was different from that of the Greeks. So this is a little bit about the social organization of the Mauryas. We have talked in detail about the Mauryan economy, about the agrarian economy, uh, urban economy, trade and towns, crafts and industry, etc. So if you have liked the video, please share it with others, and if you're not subscribed to my channel, please do so. I have also created a playlist for this channel in which I've already uploaded videos on the Mauryan Empire sources and dynastic history, Ashoka's policy of Dhamma and modern administration. And please look out for my upcoming video on Mauryan Empire. Thank you for watching. Thank you so much.